In episode 4, Rhaenyra travels away to host a bunch of guys that have called for her hand in marriage. It's basically a medieval bachelor. The problem is she's not handing out any roses. None of the guys really do it for her. They're either too old or too young. She finally gets up and calls it, leaving early. This after a 9-year-old seemed to have killed a guy who insulted him. In fairness to the 9-year-old, the guy was being a dick. As she's traveling back to King's Landing, all of a sudden a dragon comes out of the sky, and she recognizes it. It's Daemon's dragon. And Daemon's dragon is heading for King's Landing as well. So that means that she won't be the only person arriving back. Daemon, who is finally returning to King's Landing after 4 years, walks back in wearing a crown. Viserys asks him, "Why do you come in here wearing a crown?" And Daemon explains that after he defeated the Crab Feeder, the Triarchy named him the King of the Sea. But he realizes that there's only one true king, and the Stepstones now belong back to the realm. He then bends the knee, sign of respect to Viserys, who finally welcomes his brother back. They then have a mini welcome back party, and you could tell that Viserys is just happy to have his brother back. It completely overshadows Rhaenyra coming back, who, by returning early, likely embarrassed her father. But now with Daemon back, her father doesn't even care. But Rhaenyra is still very much upset by it. She goes and sits down by herself, and she's joined by Alicent. Rhaenyra starts whining about the lack of suitors she had, and how none of them actually want her. They just want her name, her power, and her ability to bear children. And while Rhaenyra is whining about this, she's completely oblivious to the fact that Alicent really didn't have that luxury to pick her own mate. Instead, Alicent has to have sex with Rhaenyra's father, who isn't looking great these days. Alicent, though, does tell Rhaenyra, "I'm glad you're back. Lately, I haven't had many friends. I still look at myself as Lady Alicent, but everybody else looks at me as the queen. So it's good to have a friendly face." And Rhaenyra looks at her friend and says, "I missed you too." So it's not just Daemon and his brother who are building bridges. Eventually, Rhaenyra is able to get her uncle alone. She asks him, "Okay, what are you doing here?" And he tells her that he just missed home. But she doesn't believe that. She knows there's some ulterior motive with Daemon. It's also clear, though, that he's not telling her what it is. They then get into her current situation with her trying to be married off. And just like with Alicent, she starts whining about her predicament. Well, that's when Daemon explains that marriage is just a political arrangement. And after you do get married, you could do whoever you want. Rhaenyra, though, is a little bit skeptical about this. Once the party ends, they finish up their night with Rhaenyra heading to her father's council. Now with the Stepstones freed up, they start talking about what exactly is going to happen with them. And it seems that even though it's been 4 years, Lord Corlys is still upset about the fact that his daughter was passed up for Alicent. Otto then brings up the fact that Corlys is planning on marrying his daughter off to the son of a person known as the Sea Lord. The Sea Lord is a part of the Free Cities, so if this were to happen, House Velaryon is entering into a pact with the Free Cities. This would likely mean that the Crown would have to seek their own marriage pact. And with Rhaenyra sitting right there, she knows what they're talking about. Rhaenyra doesn't say a word at the council meeting, though. And afterwards, she heads off to her bed, says goodnight to Sir Criston Cole, who is manning the door outside. And she has plans on just going to bed, but then she notices that there's a bag full of clothes that she doesn't recognize. And inside that bag, there is a map. The map looks like a map of her bedroom, so she goes and follows and finds out that there is a hidden tunnel from her bedroom leading to outside the gate. She puts on all those dirty clothes and follows the tunnel, and there's Daemon waiting for her. And with this disguise, she not only doesn't look like the princess, she looks like a boy. Daemon then decides to take her around and show her a King's Landing that she's never seen before. A King's Landing at night. They start off with a little bit of a play where she finds out just how unliked the idea of a woman being a ruler is. The performance all has to do with her being named heir to the throne, and she's not really well received. But Daemon didn't convince her out to watch a play. He leads her off to a brothel, and they watch an orgy. All those naked people rubbing up on each other. Rhaenyra gets all kinds of horned up. And that is when she kisses her uncle. He not only kisses her back, he rips off the hat that was concealing her hair. He pulls her pants down. I mean, it looks like they're about to do this thing, and Rhaenyra is fully willing. But then out of nowhere, Daemon pulls back, leaving the brothel. Rhaenyra can't figure out exactly what's going on, and she goes to chase after him, but she can't find him, and eventually she gets so upset that she returns to the castle, walking right through the front door, which is quite a surprise to Criston Cole, who never saw her leave, so he's very confused. But we're talking a horned-up 19-year-old. You got to let that tension out. So instead of explaining herself to Criston, she invites him in her chambers, and she decides that if she can't have her uncle, this night will do. She loses her virginity, and it seems to be the best 2 minutes of her life. And while it's never explained, it certainly doesn't seem like Criston would really care that he was the second choice. But while she's having consensual sex and enjoying it, her best friend is down the hall being forced to have sex with her father. Because very, very late at night, Lady Alicent was called to the king's chambers, and she just has to lay there and take it. And she's miserable. Now, even though Rhaenyra went out with a disguise, when Daemon pulled her hat off, she was seen by one of Otto Hightower's spies. And the next morning, that spy finds Otto Hightower and tells him exactly what he saw. With no other choice, Otto has to bring it to the king. But instead of believing Otto, the king is in complete denial. Otto doesn't feel real comfortable explaining the full severity of the situation. He tries to pussyfoot around it. But even then, the king is in denial that his brother and his daughter were hooking up the previous night at a brothel. He starts questioning the source, and Otto tells him, "This source has never proved me wrong." This whole conversation is being overheard by Alicent, who, unlike the men, wants to get to the bottom of it and isn't willing to pussyfoot around. She calls for a private meeting with Rhaenyra, and she comes right out with it. "What did you do last night?" At first, Rhaenyra says nothing, but when Alicent explains that her father brought the king some pretty bad rumors this morning regarding her and her uncle, the truth starts to come out, although not fully. Rhaenyra never once admits to hooking up with her uncle, even going so far as to say Daemon never touched her, which, isn't true at all. Even with her story having a ton of holes in it, Alicent chooses to believe her friend. But even though the king doesn't believe it, the allegation is so bad that he has to talk to his brother. He sends his guards to go find Daemon, who is extremely hungover, and he has a private one-on-one where he asks his brother, "What did you do?" And unlike Rhaenyra, Daemon owns up to it, saying, "She's of age, and if she's going to lose it to anybody, it might as well be me." And as you can imagine, the king does not take it well when his brother says that about his daughter. The king yells at Daemon, "Great, now my daughter is sullied. Who's going to touch her?" And Daemon says, "I will. Marry Rhaenyra to me. This is what our family does. Keeps the tradition alive, and it keeps our bloodline strong." But the king is completely disgusted. This was clearly Daemon's plan all along, to sully Rhaenyra's name and leave the king with really no choice but to marry his daughter off to his brother. He would leverage this to finally get to the crown. Instead of giving in, though, Viserys says, "Go back to the Vale and to the wife that you actually married. Try to restore any scrap of honor that remains. I don't want to see you." The king then returns to his room and he starts talking to Alicent. And Alicent believes her friend. She tells the king, Rhaenyra's never been one to lie, but Daemon, he's never been one to tell the truth. And Viserys asks her, what does he have to gain by lying about this? The fact is, whatever happened, Rhaenyra isn't innocent. So a little while later, he calls a meeting with Rhaenyra. He starts off the meeting by showing her a very familiar dagger. It used to belong to Aegon the Conqueror, who, it's worth mentioning, had multiple wives. But this dagger has been passed down in the family to the next king. When you heat it up, it has a secret inscription. It says, "In my blood comes the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire." He shows her this and explains that just by knowing about this dagger, that's a way bigger burden than being on the throne. And it's also a way bigger burden than her desires. She right away takes offense to the fact that he hasn't even asked for her side of the story, but he says, "Rhaenyra, it doesn't matter. It's all about perception. And I should disinherit you, but I'm not. You will wed Sir Laenor Velaryon, who in reality is way better looking than her uncle. And even though she probably should be happy about this arrangement, she's not. She yells at her father, "You're going to marry me off so I can be your remedy for your political headaches?" But he yells back, "You are my political headache. This wedding will unite the two most powerful houses in the realm. With this wedding, nobody will want to stand against us." And that's when Rhaenyra questions him on that, asking, "What about the vulture perched on your throne?" Viserys has no idea what she's talking about, and she explains, Otto Hightower. He's had an agenda this whole time. And that agenda is to get Aegon to the throne, not her. At first, Viserys is in denial about this. He thinks it's crazy. Otto Hightower has served 3 kings now. But the more she talks, the more she kind of makes sense. And once Viserys has more time to think about it, he realizes that his daughter is onto something. Late that night, he calls a meeting with Otto. One thing that he can't get over is the fact of Otto's fast rise in the kingdom. In 5 days, he went from just being a guy on the king's council to being the second most powerful guy on the throne, serving over a king and then another king, and helping Viserys become the king that he is. But it was when Viserys realized that he was played by Otto and the pawn in the game was Alicent, that's what clinched it for him. In the most difficult time in his life, it was Alicent who helped him get over the death of his wife. And Viserys realizes now that Otto was the hand that moved that pawn there. Otto tries to save face and salvage his name, but doesn't work. Viserys rips the pin off his jacket, and Otto Hightower is no longer the hand of the king. Before he can go to bed, though, there is one final thing that the king has to do. He has one of his maesters cook up a remedy for his daughter. It's basically medieval plan B, because there is no way that if his daughter is going to marry somebody, she's going to do so knocked up. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry. It'll be up in a day or two.